If you want to know how to better engage philanthropy, is to stop looking at philanthropy like philanthropy and look at them as humans who are serving in philanthropic roles, who want to be engaged like any other human, who want to be invited to be a part of something and see themselves reflected in the thing that they're a part of.
Welcome to Nonprofits Now, Leading Today, a new podcast that gives nonprofit leaders a playbook to tackle today's most pressing leadership challenges. Sean, welcome. We're so excited to be able to talk with you today. I hope that you can tell us a little bit about your nonprofit career. We're going to talk a lot about leadership today, and you've had an amazing number of experiences. And I'd love to help listeners better understand about your experiences and what brought you to the point that now you're a nonprofit coach. You're helping others do this job better.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation to be in this space with you, Stacy, and thanks for the question to get us kicked off. Yeah, this nonprofit thing is wild. I started out doing direct service work with young people who were looking for jobs and were having a hard time connecting to school. Talk about like an all day, all night type of gig. And then I went from there to supporting young people who were impacted by violence. And that was deeply traumatic, deeply important work, but also exhausting and draining. And then, because that wasn't exhausting and draining enough, as it was affirming, I decided, hey, why not lead a nonprofit organization doing similar work? And we had a ton of fun doing it. But over the course of the 6 years of growing it from a one-person entity to 30 plus folks that were serving in the cause, I evolved in my leadership style and I learned a lot about myself. And a lot of what I learned about myself was that I was leading from deficits. I was being the leader that I didn't have. And so I wanted to create the space to be that leader. I was building the organization that was different than the ones that I had worked at because I wanted to be the different organization.
You've been doing this for a while. I'm curious, what are the things that keep you motivated as you're doing this work? A lot of the folks that you coach are probably doing really difficult things. And so how do you stay engaged and eager to get up every day and help them do it?
Well, Stacey, I go to bed almost every night at about 8:30. And I wake up at about 4 o'clock in the morning. I wake up at 4 o'clock, spend some time in reflection, meditation, prayer, then get some movement in and get to the coffee shop that I work out of most days at about 6:30. And I get there at 6:30 to be able to meet my friends that are on the East Coast and the early risers that are on the West Coast and begin a really intentional journey of helping people build movements wherever they are. And what motivates me more than anything is I love humans. I can't help but see the wonder in everybody that I get a chance to be in front of. And as I witness that wonder, I get excited when they get to be big, when they get to be able to start seeing it for themselves.
You know, the focus of our talk today is about the challenges of nonprofit leadership. And at least from my vantage point, talking to leaders, it feels like we're at a tipping point in terms of the strains that nonprofit leaders have had. And it's always been challenging to run a nonprofit organization. So I don't want to pretend that this is completely different. But all of the forces that are facing leaders today feel pretty strenuous. And it's what makes us very worried about the fate of nonprofit leadership. We did a study at the Chronicle looking at nonprofit leaderships, and it was striking. The nonprofit leaders, they love their organization, they love their jobs, I mean, absolutely adore it. But 90% of them feel incredible pressures. 88% say the demands are just never ending, and that's causing a problem. So many of them are thinking about whether they're going to keep the job over the next few years. Some are going to leave to another job. Some are going to flee the sector entirely. Is that what you're seeing?
Most of the work in the nonprofit space is largely driven by problem solving. And Stacey, you and I both know what happens when you solve a problem. There's another problem. And so
Right.
this perpetual pursuit of problem solving puts you in a cadence that has no end. There is no rest. And most nonprofit leaders that I have the fortune to sit across from and share space with are so used to giving their energy to everybody else first, which is why they're exhausted, why they're burnt out, because it's a natural inclination in these spaces to not only solve the problem, but to pour ourselves into the problem. And I'll tell you something, Stacy, I've yet to witness the problem that pours back into you.
Yeah. So tell me some examples of some of the things that you're seeing. Is it especially bad with founders?
And founders have a unique struggle because the founder's identity is often inextricably woven into the fabric of the organization itself. You remove the cornerstone, the thing starts to fall apart.
Yeah.
So much of the work I do is helping people build upon the foundation of who they are and not what it is that they do.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit more about that part about the self work and the
Yeah.
self knowledge.
I spent about 3 months saying yes to myself over and over and over again. And I learned things about me that I loved and learned things about me that I didn't. I learned things about me that like required evolution and change. I recognized that so much of my drivers when I was leading in the nonprofit space were codependent and not healthy. I witnessed that like I really wanted to be loved and valued, and my desire to be in public eye had a lot to do with wanting to be affirmed and less to do with like the real work that was going on. Now the real work happened and we did really cool stuff, but I was really like self-medicating on the popularity that came with leading an organization locked into social justice space. And I had this insatiable appetite. We would win like a national award and then I'd be like, okay, what's next? Okay, what's next? Right? Which is just not a healthy orientation. So yeah, when I'm talking about this work, I lived it, I metabolized it, I came through it, and I'm like, bet I'm gonna spend the rest of my life bringing people to the place that I found, and like letting them experience completeness from within. Because like here, you're good. There's nothing else that's needed. Like you can't add to this. Like it's full. You're at capacity. You're brilliant. You're wonderful. You're good as you are.
I know that part of your philosophy very much is start with self. So, how do you do that?
Yeah. At first, it's creating space for people to be able to journey inward. And so to invite people to go inward is antithetical to their daily approach. We wake up first thing in the morning. We have our phones next to us. They light up. We respond to this thing that's outside of us. Many of us then pick up our phones and look to see if we have any messages, emails, or we begin early morning doom scrolling. As we begin to engage the world around us, we do it in such a way that it's led by all the information we witnessed as we doom scrolled. I call this learning how to run by being chased by the bear.
Yeah, tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. This is an idea that we are from birth invited to do. You know, I have two children. One's 17, the other is 23. And for the folks that are seeing me in person, will say, "Well, he looks remarkably young to have children that age." And I say, "Thank you." But in that, both of them, when they were young, when they took their first steps, what I was most excited about was their next steps. And when they said their first words, I was most excited about the next words, particularly when they were going to say dada. You know, and this is what we do as parents often. But what we're teaching young people early on is what you are is what you do. And so we get really good at doing early. Many of the nonprofit leaders that have come alongside are super good at doing one particular thing, future casting. And we love a leader that can future cast. They inspire us, they motivate us, we follow them. And the challenge is, and the leader is so good at doing the thing that when they get there, they experience what most of these future casters experience, deep discomfort, which means they automatically start dreaming about next, constantly creating the next space to occupy, the next program or project to launch. You may be that leader or you may have worked for that leader, but we all have known that leader. And they are brilliant. They are exciting when the thing's doing the thing. We're like, yes. But it's also exhausting because you're constantly being pulled along at an imagined pace that's not sustainable. And none of it's grounded in the present. And when we can't find safety in the present, we drive towards a future state. And we often learn how to get to that future state really well by being chased by the bear. And the bear is symbolic of three things: fear, scarcity, and ego. And we don't recognize that at any moment we can find something within that drives us forward instead of looking for the things outside of us to push us at a pace that's not sustainable.
How do you get people to change their mindset? Because everything you say, of course, we'd all like to change how we are, but how does that actually happen?
This is where my wife says, "Okay, that sounds good, but now what?" Uh, I've gotten better over the years of not leaving people at the sounds good place, but making sure they have some actual tangible tools to hold on to. There's these two C words that I usually gift to people early on that help them realize that they're being present. The good test to determine where we are is whether we're critical or whether we're curious.
Say more about that.
First step I invite people to, Stacy, is in a moment. where, in fact, Stacy, let's just play this out in real time. Okay. Let's
Good.
just um, give me an example of something that you experienced prior to me getting on this call with you that's coming up for you over the course of today.
We just had a wonderful team retreat.
Hmm.
And one of the things it made me realize is that we are not as collaborative as we need to be. Everybody's got the great instincts, but we
Hmm.
grew so fast as an organization,
Yeah.
we need to think about how we come together and don't have silos.
The guiding narrative that you led with there was that we need to be more collaborative. In the present, there's another C word, and it can only exist in the present. It's curiosity. And so the curiosity doesn't actually say we need to have a more collaborative environment. Curiosity says, what does this space need to be in service to the collective?
Yeah.
Curiosity doesn't have an outcome as a leading indicator. Curiosity realizes that the process is perpetually the payout. What's there to be learned? And what is there to be imagined together? And what does that imagined place look like from a place of curiosity with each other? The next steps are like, okay, well, what do I do now that I'm curious?
Yeah. And I think what's so interesting about that is that, most staffs of nonprofits are all about changing the world in various ways, but then having change at your own organization in your
Yeah.
own role is a lot tougher because that's the human part, right? How do you get
Yeah.
around that?
I was leading an organization that was working towards justice reform after the murder of George Floyd.
Mm,
Like, what plays do we run for the protests that are happening, for the influx of resources that wanted to show up, and then the inevitable cliff that occurred when people stopped paying attention to bodies of work like mine, right? Like, there's not a strategy at play for that. And so when we're working with collectives, what we do is we help them set an organizational intention, which is the North Star. What would be true every day of the week, right?
right.
So, and in most nonprofit contexts, strategy doesn't serve. In food banks, that we regularly measure the number of pounds of food distributed over the course of the year. If you're a food bank and you're perpetually serving more and more food over the course of the year, is that success as an indicator? Because it means that the need is increasing and not decreasing. Like, what does that speak to, like a more global approach to food insecurity, right? But these are the outcomes that drive funding. And when the product is the outcome and not the alignment with intention, then we end up all over the place. And it's another reason why nonprofit leaders are exhausted, because they're like, well, we're doing this today, but like if something happens socio economically, politically, we'll pivot and we'll do this tomorrow. But like, how do I stay aligned day in and day
Yeah.
out to make sure I'm getting closer to what it is we intend to do, and getting closer to where it is we intend to be?
Which gets to the question of the funding pressures
Yeah.
and what external forces there are imposing. How do you help leaders deal with the fact that most grant makers would prefer things that are easy to measure, and that maybe sometimes don't put us in the right direction of solving the problems? How do you
Yeah.
work with people to get more of the kind of funding that truly helps them meet their mission?
When I'm supporting nonprofit organizations, I remind them first that you're running a business. And like any business, the only difference is your profit goes back into the community. But if you're going to run a business, then it's where you position your product and how you position your product that brings people into your community and connects deeper with your cause. A good business finds where it sits in the marketplace, puts its product in a place that's accessible where people can engage with it. And then when people can engage with it and they have a positive experience in that engagement, then they tell other people about it. And then other people get excited about it. And then they engage with it, have a similar experience. And what you end up creating is a movement.
Mm. Do you have an example of a group you've worked with where you've seen that happen?
Well, yeah, like I'll speak two examples. I'll speak first to the work that we did at Choose 180 before I transitioned out of there. Like when I started at Choose 180, what we did was we fostered an intentional community around the cause. We did that by having one event a year that wasn't a fundraiser, but a community engagement event. And so their annual event stopped being about driving dollars and really was about low barrier entry so people can come and be present and celebrate the work that was happening in community together. Their whole framework and approach changed. They no longer had a director of philanthropy, they had a director of community engagement. And that director of community engagement was no longer focused on how many dollars they were brought in, but the metric they were tracking was how many people are connecting with the cause as a result of these processes or experiments that we have at play. We did that by trusting the people were connected to the cause, and if they were connected and they felt like we needed to exist, that they would continue to lean in with their time, treasure, and talent in a way that was personally meaningful to them and continue to advance the work. We built it differently because we wanted to build it sustainably. This is what they teach you in nonprofit leadership school. They say go through your network and identify high net worth people and then begin to play the network game. Connect with that person. Then you get in front of the next person and you're like, okay, well, what matters to them? They got super sophisticated systems now where you can not only find out how much they make, how much their house is worth, what their boat is worth. They will give you all of this personal information. And as they give you all of this personal information, what you begin to see in front of you is dollar signs. Like legit, for those that are old enough to remember, Scrooge McDuck swimming through like the gold coins on DuckTales. Like you are no longer seeing a human, you're seeing an opportunity to monetize an individual.
Yeah, and it's so transactional that nobody wants to keep doing it.
Yeah, yes, it's exhausting because you don't bring young people in or young adults in or adults in and say, oh, you're homeless. We're working with you because you're homeless, right? Or we're working with you because if we don't, you're not going to graduate. And your value is held in your ability to graduate. We don't see participants through that lens, but somehow we see donors through that lens and we monetize them without centering their humanity. And so what I'd invite people to, if you want to know how to better engage philanthropy, is to stop looking at philanthropy like philanthropy and look at them as humans who are serving in philanthropic roles, who want to be engaged like any other human, who want to be invited to be a part of something and see themselves reflected in the thing that they're a part of, and to want to be able to be a resource to champion the thing. Like this is a principle that shows up time and time again. And so when we foster an intentional community, they respond to the needs of the community. This thing is self-perpetuating and it requires far less effort in the long run. More effort on the front end, far less effort in the long run.
Throughout this conversation, when you've talked about leaders, you often use the word stewardship or stewarding the organization. And I know that one of the concerns you have is that some people don't think about it that way. Instead, they think of themselves as the owners of the organization. How do you transform people into thinking about stewardship? And what does that even mean to take a different approach on the way you lead?
Yeah, Stacy, I give credit to my wife on this one. My first couple of days when I began leading Choose 180, I was like, okay, I got my organization and this is what I'm going to do. And my wife was like, no, you're not an owner, you're a steward. And that framework was super helpful because it's one that I understand well as a dad. Like, I don't own my children, I'm a steward over their lives. And I'm glad at a certain point, you want your children to be out in the world living the life that they're imagining for themselves that's grounded in how they experience themselves. Good stewardship creates the space for that. And in that, there's an anticipation of letting go and letting it become something different that doesn't involve you in the same way. You know, I spent 6 years building a thing that I cared deeply for, and I did it as a steward, which meant I was prepared to leave and I left in a timely way that that honored the organization so they could continue to become.
And how do you bring colleagues with you on that? Because obviously it's not just about you, it's about
Mhm.
staff.
When leaders of organizations are led or chased by the bear, right, by ego, scarcity, and fear, if it's fear that's leading them the most and what's activating them the most, then they're creating environments where people feel that. And so when we begin to peel that thing back, once the leader doesn't see themselves as the owner, then people aren't clinching onto the work like they have because they felt like they had to own it. Because the leader is no longer putting it upon them to like, if it works, it's on you. If it doesn't, it's on you. It allows us to let go of the clenched fist and saying, look, it's going to be what it's going to be. I'm going to bring my best to it and invite others to do the same. And as long as others want to journey alongside where they're bringing their best to the space, then we can journey together.
Sean, what a wonderful conversation. This has been incredibly helpful. I want to end with our standing last question. What do you do to recharge?
Yeah, I have mantras that I regularly come back to and a practice of prayer and meditation that brings me center.
Tell me what they are.
Yeah, one of them is right here, right now, uh, enough for the day to serve today. And then my other mantra is listening to hear. And that's not HEAR, but that's HERE. Listening to hear. What is the present saying, and how can I be present to that and respond in a way that honors it as a steward of all things?
Thank you for all of the advice and examples and things that you have offered. We so appreciate it. Sean, thank you for doing this podcast.
Oh, it's a gift. I appreciate the invitation.